Today I'm going to talk about no self and how the idea creates confusion for a lot of us. We all know that Buddhism teaches that there's no self or soul, and by that it means there's no autonomously existent eternal individual that goes from life to life and transmigrates eternally blissful, illumined, and so forth. And the reason that Buddhism says there's no eternally existing independent self or soul is that it's simply untenable. Because, for one thing, if there was an eternal entity that was unique and individual and autonomous, there would be no way of knowing it, that such a thing existed. Because it is autonomous. That's by very definition. So, the idea of a soul is absent in Buddhism. And this has even frightened many Buddhists, this concept. And a notable great scholar, was a Buddhist all his life, actually switched to Christianity a few years back, because it was the more he dove into the idea of no self, the more frightened he became. He just reverted back to Christianity after decades of being a Buddhist. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about the idea of soul and no self, and how frightening it can be for people. And it actually drives a lot of people away from studying Buddhism. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, according to my own understanding on the level that I'm on, which is certainly not, in a high enough to give a really accurate description of the topic, and I don't pretend to do so. But I can give a little bit of an explanation that will be helpful in terms of practice to understand better the issues involved, so that it might be helpful for practitioners, it's like myself, to get a little further on the path and understanding what self and no self and all of that is all about. So basically, in Buddhist practice, we look into, the self. So we have to understand that Buddhism, when it says there's no self, that's a very, very advanced level of understanding that one comes to eventually. And eventually it can be many lifetimes away. And until that time comes, we have to actually have a strong sense of self, because we need courage. We need to have a high level of patience and fortitude, discipline, and bravery to actually tackle the practice that the Buddhist practice entails a lot of truth. And by that I mean looking at one's issues. What is would rather not look at, and many times we don't want to look at it so much that over years and decades we've swept our issues under the blanket of consciousness and we've completely forgotten about it. And a standard complaint that demonstrates this is when beginners practice, oftentimes they say, well, I was a lot better off before I started practicing Buddhism because I'm miserable now. I all these problems that I didn't have before are now have a magnifying glass on them, and I'm completely miserable. And so a lot of people quit after beginning and meditation and the Buddhist path. So this is really a confusion, because in actuality it's a sign of correct practice for a beginner to be miserable, not be happy about it, and have all his faults exposed and so forth. That's what beginning is really supposed to be about. Those practitioners that feel that way are actually practicing really well. It's the ones that think begin meditation, they think it's just great and so happy, and they're bliss. They sit and they're basically watching their own happiness, so to speak, happy mind, and they kind of imagine that their mind is still and quiet, and they create a kind of a magical world. Imagination creates it, and they get stuck in these kind of self-induced euphorias, and that's a real danger, and that can go on for a long, long time. So whenever a practitioner tells me that they really love meditation after only a few weeks of it, then I know that they're really not getting it, especially if they, sit there all blissed out. That's just their own mind-created paradises. So basically, meditation is facing issues, facing afflictions. It uncovers a lot of stuff right from the beginning. And so initially, it's tough work. And so, many masters say, like we think about no self, actually, it's here where the view of self is really developed. You have to have a strong sense of self in order to practice meditation. Otherwise, you can't practice because you can't face your issues. So you need a strong sense of who you are, and I'm going to do this, and so forth. So there's that kind of attitude, like I'm going to practice, I'm going to be disciplined, I'm going to face my issues, and so forth. That kind of attitude and that notion of self is very helpful. That self is actually going to get you deeply into practice. So you need what's called a provisional self to practice the path. So you have a provisional self. Provisional means it's temporary. So this kind of self is like the proverbial raft that takes the person across the river, and once he gets across the river, he no longer needs the raft. So this provisional self that we develop early in our meditation is like a raft, and once we get through certain levels of meditation, we don't need the raft anymore, and we kind of go on and start dissolving the self. And when I say dissolving the self, what I'm talking about is separating from the personal constructed self and gradually ceasing to identify with that self. I'll use a little example here. We've all noticed how, like great masters, they manage to maintain their calm even in very trying situations, like Tibetans getting arrested by Chinese. It's been noted that they don't harbor any anger, they remain calm and so forth. And just general things, like one time I picked up a great master at the airport, Ayan Rinpoche, when he came to visit Hawaii and was given teachings there. I picked him up at the airport, and all of his ritual objects for that teaching were in a suitcase. The airline lost that suitcase, so when I picked him up at the airport, we went to get his bag, it wasn't there. And so I went to the baggage claim and filed a complaint and everything, and he had to give a teaching the following day, and he needed those following evening, and he needed those ritual items. So I filed a baggage claim and everything and gave my address and place to contact me. So the following morning I went there for breakfast to bring breakfast for him. He was staying in a separate place, and he didn't even mention his bag. I did. I said that nobody called about it or anything. And so he said, well, what do you want to, I said, I suggested, well, let's go to the crater today and do some sightseeing. So I took him up the Haleakala crater, and we walked into the crater. And he never mentioned his bag all day, I would have been calling the baggage claim myself, all the time. You expect him to ask me, but he didn't. As it turned out, he was calm the whole day. He didn't even think about it. And then when I got to my house, the bag got delivered. And so I contacted him, and I brought the bag over to him and took him to the teaching. So, he was so calm through this whole thing, and it was really an essential item. And in other instances, when things didn't go well, when he was leaving the airport, they claimed that his ticket wasn't good. It didn't match his passport or something, which was totally false. And he remained very calm and collected, and just, asked for a manager and so forth, and we got it straightened out, but he didn't get ruffled. So the great masters, they have a kind of stillness that they abide in. And we all know, anybody who's been around a teacher, just the way they are, they don't get moved by circumstances, so to speak. They have a sense of inner peace. And what that is the constructed self is kind of dissolved already. The sense of I that we call, which is known as a construct, the sense of self that we usually have is a construct, the personal self. So these masters, they kind of dissolve that personal self. Even if they're not fully enlightened, they don't have this personal self like we do. So they don't have so much the constructed self. So I'm going to give an example of what this constructed self is. Basically, the constructed self is the self that we're most familiar with. Let's say you think to yourself, okay, I have a job interview tomorrow. And you kind of mark it on your calendar, and then the next day comes and you're doing various things, and you're going to get your hair cut or something like that, or going to meet a client or a business partner, or going to school or whatever, and you space out that completely, that appointment that you made, that job interview. So you're driving somewhere else and something taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, what about the job interview? And then you're reminded of it and you think, oh, I forgot my job interview. I missed my job interview. So you think that you're the person, the constructed person, that did that. I made a mistake. And you identify with that, and you have a sense of self associated with that personal ambition. You might have made the job interview and then got the job. And then you feel, all elated. Oh, I'm so happy. I am so happy because I got the job. So you identify with the self that's happy because of a certain ambition that you had. So this is a construct that we make all the time throughout the day. And we identify with that constructed self. Like, I did this and I did that and I forgot to do this and I forgot to do that. It all comes to a personal self. That personal self is okay, but there's more to all of us than that personal self. And the difference between a person that's a little realized, like the person giving the teaching I just mentioned, Ayam Rinpoche, and ourselves, is they don't take the personal self so seriously because they've developed an impersonal self. They plugged into the source of consciousness, and so they identify more with consciousness, which is universal, shared by everybody else, than they do with their personal allotment of consciousness. So they have a different perspective altogether. If something goes wrong for you and me, we feel terrible about it. If something goes right for you and me, we feel great about it. But we don't know anything else. But masters, or people that have developed meditation skill, they know something else. They know the consciousness that everybody shares, not just the individual consciousness. So the master I took to the airport, because he identified with the universal consciousness that we all share, for him, them losing his bags and whether they ever return it again, there's nothing he can do about it. But he identifies with a different level of consciousness, so it didn't matter so much to him. You and I would have a freak out about it because we identify with our personal stuff, personal thoughts, having to do with our lives and what we want and what we do. So when Buddhism talks about no self, they're really, at least on a certain level, they're talking about kind of merging this personal self into a more universal self, or universal consciousness, awareness. And so that's why, we feel so much warmth around great teachers, is because they identify with a consciousness that we all share rather than their personal consciousness. So they radiate that. And so the more we understand this, that no self, at least for a long, long time in our practice, means to slowly dissolve this personal self and become more, identify more with the universal self. So that's a kind of a strong sense of self that's useful for practicing. And so like a master, like great masters, they identify with this universal self until they develop such skill that the personal self just isn't, they don't take it as real at all anymore. So at least for a time in our practice, if we kind of understand that what no self really means, it's this constructed self that we really have to kind of dissolve into a higher level of awareness where we're more identified with just consciousness itself and impersonal consciousness, which is a source of everybody's thought. Like we're all drinking from the same river of consciousness. So instead of just thinking about the glass that we have of the river water, think of it in terms of like you can have a glass and drinking from the glass and think you're drinking from the glass of water, or you can think you're drinking the river water. So it's just a different perspective that we want to develop. So understanding this can be very helpful in developing, overcoming fear, overcoming obsession with afflictions and obstacles. We all have those. Every individual has them. But if we understand there's more to ourselves, that all of those personal afflictions and obstacles and stuff are limited to a constructed self, and that we're more than that. If we understand that, that is very helpful in meditation. It can take us a long way and help us to be more fearless. So that's something to think about.